Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Goedenavond iedereen en welkom op deze eerste lezing van het jaar. A+ Architecture in Belgium en Bozar slaan dit jaar opnieuw de handen in elkaar en realiseren een uitgebreid cultureel programma van lezingen, discussies en tentoonstellingen hier in het Paleis voor Schone Kunsten. Lina Ghotmeh ouvre ce soir le cycle de conférences internationales d'architecture de cette année 2023 pour nous présenter son travail qui se situe à l'intersection entre l'art, l'architecture et le design. Chacun de ces projets, qu'elle considère comme des archéologies du futur, réinvente les traces de son passé. Lina Ghotmeh heeft haar architectenbureau in Parijs en werkt aan projecten in symbiose met de natuur en een doorgedreven historische vooronderzoek. Elle enseigne actuellement à l'école d'architecture de Yale et à l'université de Toronto. Elle est coprésidente du réseau scientifique pour l'architecture dans les climats extrêmes et membre du jury du prix Aga Khan d'architecture. Ze ontving de Schelling 2020 Architectuurprijs en is dit jaar uitgenodigd om het nieuwe Serpentine Pavilion in Londen te ontwerpen. De lezingenreeks van 2023 wordt mogelijk gemaakt door een aantal instanties die wij graag willen bedanken voor hun steun. Onze structurele partner Febelsem, onze structurele sponsor D'Ieteren IMO, de Vlaamse overheid, la ville de Bruxelles, la région de Bruxelles-Capitale, ainsi que la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles. Je tiens aussi bien évidemment à remercier Bozar pour avoir coproduit cet événement avec A+. Je laisse maintenant place à Lina Ghotmeh et vous souhaite à tous une très bonne conférence.
Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Merci beaucoup, Lara. Sorry, I'm starting in French immediately. Hi, everyone. Thank you for Lara for the introduction. I'm very happy to be among you tonight. And thank you so much for all the sponsors of this event and the Beaux-Arts and A+ Architecture. It's really wonderful to be in Brussels today. So I will present my work, my process of work through a selection of projects tonight, and I hope you will enjoy it. So we'll travel a little bit in some of the countries where I had the chance to work with my atelier, but also talk about how we design what I call the archaeology of the future, which is a bit what drives in a way the research and the thinking about every project that we are making. So always as architects, and I am sure there are lots of students today in this room, when we start a project, we're always looking at Earth. We're looking at this Google, and then we zoom in, and we start to look at the site where we are intervening. And it's interesting because for us as a profession, we're really concerned about this whole home in which we inhabit. And as we know, we are in past almost the Anthropocene, and that us as humans, we became really a dominant force on the planet. And we need more than almost two planets actually to sustain our consumption, so to produce as much biotop to sustain us on this planet. So this is, of course, these are questions that are at the heart of what we are producing as architects and how we think about space and construction, because more than 40% of the carbon emission is coming from the construction industry. And this photo, I really like it, by Joe Kesarwani, where we can see Beirut, the city of Beirut, with this kind of invasion of concrete that just comes and eats up the sea, and the capacity of the sea to flatten, in a way, all the construction that had happened. So also with this Anthropocenic area, we are also ending, in a way, the schism and this binary vision that we have between us and the universe. And we actually, Earth doesn't need us, we need the Earth to survive. And we actually are more microbes than we are humans, maybe Arsim Boldo was right, because our bodies are more composed in a good percentage of microbes and so basically of microorganisms. So we have this kind of relation to nature that is inherent to us. And in a way, that makes us question how much nature and architecture, in the way we produce spaces and in their relation to the climate, to the environment, and more literally sometimes with the vegetation around, how it grows from the environment. And these questions come up also since I grew up in Beirut. Beirut is a city that was constantly buried because of earthquakes, and I have a lot of thoughts at the moment with the earthquake that happened in Turkey and Syria and influenced a bit Lebanon. But so basically, every time there are events with wars that kind of allow the city to disappear, and every time we dig in, we uncover in archaeology, we uncover traces, but also that reminds us how everything weathers away, a question of ephemerity, but this relationship with Earth, with the traces, and architecture as a work of palimpsest, of tracing. So when we're thinking to build, we're going back to how we used to build as a hut and then maybe as a house or a multi-story building or a tower. But what we're trying to think of with my team is how we can basically unravel architecture, how it can emerge from the place in which it intervenes. Almost like obelisk, like this obelisk that was found in Egypt, that is unfinished, that is sculpted from the environment in which it is found. And it's a kind of a transformational process, like an evolutionary process in a way, that comes from the complexity of making, complexity of medium also related to the making, whether researching what is the typology that we want to design, how it had evolved through time, how can we rethink that typology to our time, whether working with prototypes, with models, with images, with computer renders. So really kind of crossing also multiple tools of making, and always thinking by hand, even if we are not always drawing by hand, but the hand is is always this link that we have to our environment, this possibility of linking to the sensitive environment that surround us. So if we think of architecture as somehow maybe a field that is positioned between archaeology as of what it brings us to think of the past, it's about digging, about unraveling what had happened before and the traces of the past, but also that is related to us as human beings, about the living also, like it's inclusive, it talks about society, about craft. It's related to nature, of course. It has to be nurturing, ecological. It has to be sensitive. And the future, because every time we build something or we renovate something, it's kind of talking about an emergence, about something that new that is happening within that place. So within this methodology, I found actually myself working a lot in different contexts, and always sometimes contexts that are quite like conflictual, where there is the trauma that had happened, and every time there is a subject that is more present or more predominant in every project. Like one of the first projects that I worked on that I won with two other colleagues, architects, and we established our first partnership practice, is this Estonian National Museum in Tartu. And this competition was really amazing because it was, they put on an international competition the building of their national museum, 34,000 square meters project in Estonia. Estonia is had been under Soviet occupation until '91, and it had joined the European Union in 2003. And this building, positioned in Tartu, which is the cultural capital of Estonia, is really a way for them to affirm their identity, to somehow showcase all what they have been gathering all through the time. And Tartu is the cultural capital. It's really the place where we talk about folk, we talk about these objects that like have been gathered through time, objects that are important for them because of their narrative, because what they say about their Finno-Ugric culture, their belonging to nature, to the climate itself. And one of the things that was very impressive about that site and that hadn't been talked about during in the competition brief was the presence on site of this like large scar that kind of cuts the landscape. While the competition site itself was rather positioned on this lot. And digging into the history of that place, we discovered that actually one of the first museums, national museums, was established on site, taking the house of a noble German, German noble house, and it was transformed by Jacob Hirt into the first institution of the museum. And then from there, actually, they started having this belonging to that site, which is really close to the city center, but yet was unurbanized. And looking at that more thoroughly, this kind of a scar in the landscape was actually one of the biggest military airfield, Soviet military airfield that existed in the Baltic states. So that was also the site where many Estonians used to do their manifestation for independence. So this scar that just kind of prolongs the landscape is just sitting as an open platform. Many of us architects, we look at this and remember the beautiful drawings of dystopia by architecture, by Super Studio. And we see this continuous monument and think, how can we actually reappropriate that? So the approach of this building was to go out of the site that was assigned by the competition brief and propose actually a museum that continues that airfield and in a way that acts more like an urban platform, as an urban regenerator of the area around. Almost like a kind of having a territorial scale to it rather than just an icon that sits independently on its site. So the platform, which is the airfield, becomes a place for identity, and identity is not a fixed element, is not defined, is diverse, is open, and is in constant constitution. So it's possible to always manufacture this multiple identity that could be in a nation. So the building becomes open to that airfield and also open to the public to appropriate it. It disappears through in the landscape itself. And we could see, like, once the building started to be constructed, people were doing this manifestation to put the first stone. So thinking about the importance of architecture in relation to a nation or a society. And when it's emerging is this relationship to the ground, to the archaeology of the ground. Then this monumental scale had to be fragmented to be more interrelated to the city scale, and within the building, the functions gain the scale of the houses around, so almost like micro-environments that are housed within one roof. And the fact that the building has two entrances also questioned, in a way, the way we do museography in a museum. So multiple narratives could develop within that project. So we see here this entrance, like main entrance, or let's say the entrance from the south end, where we see the cantilever that talks about also the wings of airplanes. Maybe it talks about the memory of the site. And then the envelope of the building is this fritted glass with these stars, which are like symbols of like Estonian resistance to the occupation. So this cornflower symbol that we see in many of the textile knitted. So somehow it envelopes the body of the museum, and it becomes the cover for the museum itself. And the building really changes in like different weathers, and as we have -20 in wintertime in Estonia. And that was really a good challenge, because it's about also how to make a building that is not very consumer of energy in such a climate. And one of the challenge also, other than that, was like to advocate for open spaces, not only enclosed spaces where we have functions, but the spaces in between become quite important, because they're unfunctional spaces, but they are places where the public and the people of the museum will intervene in, and these are the spaces that become creative, because they are spaces in between one function and the other. So we see here the library. So it's kind of a micro-cultural incubator where life can happen, where, for example, in this open bridge area, people could intervene and do a concert, a cultural manifestation, kids in the exhibition halls. And then as soon as we enter and continue through the building, we start at a height of more than 7 meters, and then it goes into 3 meters and then out into the airfield. And the building at that edge disappears and really kind of become the landscape itself, and it's really almost like part of the landscape. And we can see here like how it meets this ground. I will show also this movie, which was done by Estonian cinematographers, which was really interesting because they really appropriated spaces in the building that were really unpreviewed for such use, but also thinking about the guts of architecture as of what we do as really productive spaces. He wasn't moving. So at some point we saw the woman in the canopy actually of the building. She was knitting in this kind of a structure. So another subject is waste, and how can architecture maybe talk about waste? And this is a project that we are developing in Paris, and that hopefully will start construction in a few months. Was part of a competition that was launched by the city of Paris for innovative projects that deal with the climate challenge. And we decided here to deal with the food waste and how to make a place that talks about sustainable feeding and have basically a place about the culture of eating, how to eat differently, more sustainably, more in relation to a circular economy, a place of cultivation, but to be cultivated as well, and that is based on circular kind of thinking in architecture and in use. So here we didn't have really a set program. We invented the whole program, thinking of urban agriculture on the roof of a tower, and then housing, kind of place of transmitting what we have learned, what we have planted on the roof, a canteen, a place of recycling the waste, and then of disseminating, and then of composting on the roof of another adjacent building. And in a way also fitting within the environment with this wooden school that exists by, building a structure in wood, both for this relation to the context, but also to build a more sustainable construction with a low carbon material. And in a way also thinking about the interrelation between the different levels, between the different functions. So it's not anymore about just accumulating levels from one to the other, but really kind of creating moments of interaction between one level to the other by this tapering form of the building. And somehow these ramps that go around the tower become moments of meeting point between the different users and inhabitants of that building, where it's about moments of serendipity. And we see actually that this structure emerges in wood construction next to an old station, so railway station, because Paris has this petite ceinture that just crosses the heart of Paris. And we have these kind of left out stations there. And so talking about promenade, about rising up in the sky of the city. So it was really interesting here to work with wood construction and a bit higher elevated structures, and seeing also wood as a way of constructing by deconstructing. In a way, the building could be assemblable, disassemblable, so the material will be reused and repurposed. So thinking also of ephemerality of the architecture itself. And everything functioning as a cycle, so we recompose the waste and reuse the water within that building, and in a way like having places of experimental agriculture with AgroParisTech and the like height of the tower, like housing, but also places of conviviality, of relating to the neighborhood in the 13th, because it's a very diverse and international neighborhood, and maybe taking also food as a way of bringing people together, know-how of cooking and of relating to this first relation that we have to Earth. Moving here to Beirut, a question of healing or of thinking about scars of the past, of history, of war. This project in Beirut, Stone Garden, that we delivered a bit a year and a half ago. And this is a building that is very close to the port of Beirut. Some of you, of course, you have heard about the explosion that had happened in 2020, and this is really adjacent to the site where it had happened. And it's a residential project, so it's a housing project, and at the same time, it's a project that has to talk about Beirut. So having grown in the city that is in constant transformation, where you can see here in this photo, like this juxtaposition between like these Ottoman houses that exist here that talk about the history of Beirut, with the developers' towers that's just kind of mushrooming, and nature is coming in between. And at the same time, with all the chaos that is constantly present in that city, it's a city of life, of extremes, of festivity that is constantly happening. I like also this drawing here by Zarina Hashmi, where we can see the city has almost like lost its streets. It's like a palimpsest constantly redrawn as a map. There is no one urban map, actually, or urban vision to the city of Beirut, but it's constant like juxtaposition of different situations. Like this photo also of Fuad al-Khouri, where we can see these staircases of this old house that is just built for the pleasure of a staircase and invaded by nature. Or moments that are more like incremental or informal, where actually it's about addition of different buildings and nature is also part of how it happens. Other extreme moments of crisis of housing, something that we are facing, and how to deal with these questions, and waste, the waste that is happening all around the world, but is more visible in Beirut. And the city of and its past, with this photo of during Ottoman times. And these houses that are constantly like ghosts that are disappearing from the city. And the transformation of it from these towers and the city center. So the building site is very close to the city center of Beirut. So the city center was completely like destroyed during the war, but also refurbished completely anew, losing in a way the time of destruction and what had happened. So in a way, losing the memory of the city at the same time. So we see here what had existed before was this small building here that was in a fragile state, and it was also the first building of manufacture of concrete in Beirut, and it's also the office of a renowned architect, Pierre Khoury, a modernist architect, that had died, and he actually gave the land to his son and daughters. And actually, one of the sons is Fouad El Khoury, who is a photographer and who we met, and he was like very excited about this, like having this lot, but not knowing what to build there, how to build, and how to talk also about all the memory that is interrelated to Beirut, but also to the memory of Beirut. So Fouad had done also in '92 with other photographers like Gabriel Basilico, Joseph Kodaika, like a journey in the city center of Beirut, and had published this book in '92. And it really records the history of what had happened in the city center. These are scenes that I grew up with without really seeing them completely. Of course, we're like hiding not to see these scenes, but they are very much present. And it was really important, I think, for the population to really take the time to heal and to kind of relate to what had happened during the years of war. We can see this kind of destruction of the buildings, but also the very much relation that exists between us as humans and our environments, where we become almost frail. So the building tries, of course, in a complex and indirect manner to talk about these and in a form of a housing that really wants to be anchored in its ground, that's related to the ground and with this material, but also that relates to in a way an opening that becomes more kind of eating up a volume within a space. So how do we create an opening within a mass that is emerging in Beirut that becomes more of a place for life and for nature? An opening also that is not only a window, but is also a device to frame the outside, to kind of talk about the city within the household as a way of almost like an artwork or photography within the housing environment. These photos are ones that I took during construction sites, so there were no light inside, and like focusing really on what we see from the city from within, and how the window could become a device, a critical device towards the outside that we see. And these moments also of eating up a volume that kind of talk about the moment of subtraction or destruction within the city. And these openings are not only openings of that bear memory, but they are also ones of life. So they are ones that have nature within, so gardens, a practice that very much exists actually in Beirut. You will always walk in any Mediterranean city and see everyone having their own plants or different scales of planters or trees within their balcony. So somehow integrating these as part of the architecture of the building. Also in avoiding another technique in Beirut, which is having a balcony and then glazing it, and that's the trauma of any architect. So we can see also like here in a conjunction of the environment, so it's not a tower, it's really a tiny house. Another thing that we can see, like that we try to, like I try to think about, is these typical house like plans that are really repetitive, and we always see in any, like in these towers. So maybe through the windows we can start to have alternative planning. So every flat becomes different and more individualized, and nature is really giving this uniqueness to every floor and maybe capacity to live differently and to relate differently within the building. So here we have this entrance that is more like a womb, is very like a modest lobby. And then within the apartments, each one was appropriating the space. We can see, for example, this one with the planter outside, small balcony, and then the view towards the port area. And here, like within this view here is a view towards the outside, but one can see almost like a painting that is like hanging in the space. These are the photos Iwan Ban had taken actually just before the explosion that had happened. And then we can see like some moments also of geometry of the building. And actually this geometry is really one that portrays the urban regulation. We are always working with these laws that we have to read and that dictate forms to our building. And then after they disappear, and here, because of the complexity of these regulations, I thought I wanted to show them in the architecture, so we could see how the building itself starts to be hit by these cabaret lines, the red lines that start to become like a form in the building, but maybe opportunities also for different shapes of spaces and balconies, and also possibilities of relating to the ground through the vegetation that climbs up. And some of the photos I took after actually the explosion, where nature just grew up by itself with its potential. And then the ground floor is one that is dedicated for the image, and it's a platform for image and debate in the Middle East. So here, Fuad wanted to really keep this very raw and without any finishing. We fought, of course, because I wanted it to be like the outside more like brown color. But at the same time, it's nice. It's just like giving this raw feel to the gallery space. And it's a place of exhibition. And about this exhibition, and this is the model that we exhibited in Venice Biennale, I want to talk about it because I don't know if some of you have seen it, but the idea of the model was to use the model as a tool of showing another, like showing actually like the inside of Beirut, but also how this kind of places that are always an instability are places where artists and creatives really play an important role. They're always portraying their environment and critically showing the situations, like, for example, these left-out houses that Gregory Bavshakishian has shown, or the blue of the Mediterranean Sea. So the inside of these apartments start to show us like how what the community is talking about in Beirut and how they're portraying their city. Sometimes we see these movies that also show like extracts of movies taken back in the 80s, and that where people talk about their difficulty and situation that still persists even nowadays. Or other moments where we see the way the facade was finished and done. And the facade was really this work of the hand. So working with the artisans locally and trying to see how we can make this building really become an emotional feel, like really portray a relation with its ground, but also become a tool of the artisan being part of the making of the project. So we're experimenting with this kind of chiseling technique and thinking I wanted this kind of feeling of earth, really, that really emerges in the verticality of the city. So I started drawing this comb that becomes the comb of the building. And then they did the multiple of combs. And then combing the elevation, like plastering, traditional technique, but then thickening that plaster and then having this invade the facade. So, and this technique actually started with some tests in the atelier with this clay tests and trying to test them in the fork, and then moving to the scale of the building itself. And there was really a joy working with and of course frustration, but what joy is what remains. Working with the artisans, like trying to get the technique and trying to really have all the corners done and interrelating with the building. They were really sometimes coming back to me like after sleep and then saying like, oh, I thought that we can add this or do this so we can like really achieve the desired result. And after the explosion, we can see here like that the building was shielded by the silo where the explosion had happened. But also what was nice that the facade didn't move. So it was really kind of solidly staying. Especially that the building is not a glass structure. It's measuring its windows for climatic reasons as well. Knowing that we are in a Mediterranean climate, so really reducing the the climatization of the interiors, and almost looking at vernacular way of constructing. And what we see here are the windows, like in this facade, are the windows of the south facade, but it's a facade that is bound to be covered too. So some people asked me actually, like these are so small to see outside, but actually all these are like either the toilets or like the kitchen is sitting here. And at some point, because of the urban regulation, this building can be destroyed and then this will be hidden. Thankfully, the neighbor decided to renovate instead of demolishing, which is great. And we see here also this relationship with the surrounding and how it's sitting actually after the explosion had happened. And they closed the windows with wood here. And always seeing like people sitting on the street is this relationship with the outside that in these climates, but in these cultures we have, that the public and the private are always intertwined and interrelated. And this photo is taken recently, but it looks like in the 80s with this car and like. Staying in Lebanon, traveling to the mountains. So Beirut and Lebanon. Lebanon is about Beirut, the sea, and the relation to the sea, but it's also about the mountain, the valley. And I added this project because of the question of seism, that earthquake that had happened, and like a thought to what had happened, but also thinking about the territory and this. This area here in the valley is really one of the deepest rifts that exist in the region in terms of earthquakes. And here, one project, like one winemaker came to us and wanted to build a hotel that is a rural hotel dedicated to a wine experience. So we are really in this relationship to this landscape and to a man that had both started as an agricultor who was Michel de Bestros, and said, like bit by bit, as a kind of work of resistance, started to buy more land and to develop like these vineyards. And the ground is very rich, is really allowing for different types of wines within one ground. Somehow maybe relating to the history of this region with this with the temple of Baalbek that is also a node to Bacchus, who is the symbol of wine, and this kind of relationship to ancestral history that is related to the territory. And within the site, we could see these troglodyte structures that are very much embedded in the rocks of the place. And so this kind of very emerging structures that almost like architecture that exists within that site. So within this place, the building somehow had to really relate to the context, almost like a Michael Heiser installation, like in land art or like excavation. So we started thinking about this project as more like a line that really expresses also the depth of the seismic line that emerges from the ground and that goes up from this very thin land that is left between two wine fields. So it's kind of a continuity to the lines also of the vineyards that start to emerge a structure above. And the inside of this rural hotel becomes a place of immersion in the history of this territory, talking about the wines produced, but also the history of the maker. And the rooms are rooms that talk about the colors of the grapes that transform through time, testing with different colors at the atelier. And then the rooms are grapes within that form, and then seeing how the colors, different color variation of wine, and trying to maybe try to create an immersion through the material within the space of each room. We can see here like this variation of colors, and the room becoming like an opening to the framing actually the vineyards. Stitching, still again in Lebanon. And here we're up to the mountains. So moving from the seaside to the valley and up to the mountains, and we're in a region called Marshaya. And this is an open archive museum that was a competition we won, and it was the idea of the collector who's collecting works of like different artists who depicted the history of Lebanon, is to make a building that is like a new kind of typology where it's an archive of storage for the works that he had collected, but also a place where visitors can come and experience a new way of living a museum. And we're here in the mountain of Lebanon, and it's really the site is talking about this journey from the sea to the mountains, so moving from the density of the city to the lush of the mountain and the forest, and overviewing the whole landscape. And it's actually with this topography, it's really exemplifying the topography of Lebanon. So for me, it was very difficult how to intervene within that site and without really altering the quality of it as we see it here, like all with this moist and this moss really taking over the stones. So the topography was an important element that we started doing in models and thinking about. And then the collection itself, how the collection should be housed within. Almost like a cabinet of curiosity where one could enter and then go back to the earlier typologies of what a museum could be. And also within that, mainly all the collection should be like hid from light and protected, and only a few of it is like appearing, so like almost like an iceberg that would be hidden in the ground. And we did a research thinking about how the museum typology evolved, and how can we think about this connection between a storage, a museum, within that structure. Thinking also a parallel to some of the houses structure in Lebanon, this open hall house. So we can see as a typology, there is always this diwan, which is this open heart where all the different rooms open to. It's a place of conviviality. It's a place of that is also giving a good climate to the spaces as it's a ventilated space. So it's also this place of encounter. So within that, we thought that maybe it's interesting to create like a liwan, like a heart actually, to the whole place, to this whole archive museum. And to really establish the building where we can least harm the trees that are existing. And then we started kind of trying to map where the site could be actually within that site, and where we can develop the project. And then developing all the storage rooms around like one hall that invites the visitor within. And thinking about this hall as a place that could be multifunctional, like almost like an open library. Maybe it's a theater, there are events that could happen there, or it's a museum place for displaying. And the building is really kind of emerging from the continuity with the land itself, and somehow the heart becomes active within that structure. And the outside is always part of the inside, and most of the projects is really like the terrain is really a place where we can exhibit, where we can expand art within nature, and becomes really both an interior experience and an external experience as well. So here we can see this section and this place that becomes a heart where actually one could enter and then go all around as a large library that portrays art and showcases a different collection, but also allow the visitor to make their own narrative within that space. And within that, actually, the building becomes very bioclimatic. So the idea is to put it underground, so to reduce also all the need of climatization and temperature stability for the collection itself. There is a whole work that we did with our engineers to recollect water and to make it really like a sleeping animal within this environment. Okay, so last project I will show is this project that we are finishing just in 2 months and opening up. And this is a leather manufacturer for Hermès. So here we are in Normandy, back in France. And it's, as we know, like Normandy is very rainy. And it's the first manufacturer where Hermès wanted also to make their saddleries work. So it was a competition also for doing the first building that is passive and low carbon. And at the same time, for me, was the challenge how to make a place for production that is not stigmatized as a place of production. It could be any kind of building. A place that talks about the precision of the hand through the architecture. So it's kind of micro scale, this care that is given to every product and every material that is used. Also the trace of the hand through the making of architecture. In a place, in a site that is very close to Louviers, which is a city that is built by bricks. And the site itself has these nice like trees, like it's an open field. It's very wet and rainy. And one thing that also was really interesting in this project is to go into the exercise of building a low carbon and a passive building, which was the first passive building that we are making. And it's a really interesting technical exercise, but it is intertwined into architecture. And I want to show a little bit more technicality here. And there are 3 aspects that we worked on: is the energy of the building, how to use renewable energies, the carbon impact, how to reduce to the maximum the carbon footprint, and how to enhance the well-being within the project. So when we talk about energy, we're really trying to move from a classical building, which is very based on fossil fuel production of energies, into a very virtuous building. So the exercise starts first by a bioclimatic approach, is really to kind of think about a building that responds to nature, that is really kind of thinking about its environment and its resources, so how it could be compact to the site and in relation to the program, where it becomes a tool, a grid, like a tool that can evolve through time, but also one that responds to just basic things that like north, south, east, west, like trying to put the atelier where the manufacture will happen to be more on the north light, bringing more light into the inside, allowing for natural ventilation, having nature around that protects during summertime, and that in reverse during wintertime loses the leaves and allow more sun to come in. And we realized with our engineers that just by doing that, we really allow the building to be more comfortable for human beings. So we are really closening to the zone of comfort of us as human beings. So we're closer to this 22 degrees. So we need less climatization and heating for the project itself. And then to produce energy, we think about more clean energies, like at this time geothermal energy, and then thinking about complementing that with like solar panels. So basically with this exercise, trying to quantify more, to arrive more to a renewable energy source, so basically the building can become independent in its production of energy, has more clean energy to use, basically. So in relation, for example, to a gas production, we reduced to 77% of carbon impact with such solution of the geothermal or photovoltaic. Of course, they still produce carbon, but we're still like going towards the neutrality. And then after, there's an exercise of using natural biosourced material, wood, bricks, and trying to think of bricks, because bricks is what is manufactured very locally. So thinking of the building as a tool also to revive local industries, to use the earth of the site, and to produce the material of the building from the ground. So we started working with this local manufacturer who's an artisan who've been inheriting this his enterprise from his like grandfathers, and who has this very like ancestral oven. He draws this over all the time, that how beautiful the cooking is of the bricks. So he did 550,000 bricks. He hated me afterwards. And then cooked them. And actually, I wanted this color to be not like the red, and a bit more like a violet color. So it was a bit difficult to achieve, but we arrived to do it. And then we reused all the waste that had happened during the cooking, or all the black basically bricks. And one of the things that was really nice also was to again work with artisans and the compagnon masons, and to reform masons actually on brick making, because this technique had been like forgotten. Especially if it's structural bricks. It's not like habillage, it's not like cladding, it's really like a structural brick. So thinking about how to work on the arch and building the structure, and also optimizing the thickness of the arch itself, like to have this very thin arches that are spanning. And this is possible due to possibility of calculating today with our tools the material that we can use. The arches of, which is a natural shape of a span in brick construction, start also to talk about the horse, like the like horse saddleries and riding, and talking about also an element that exists within the building function. So the building is a tool. It's talking about the life around, and it's also talking about time. We can see here how. So I don't have yet the photos of the finished project. And well-being, of course, like this environment that is landscaped all around, where nature is part of the construction. And we can see here like the model that was exhibited in a bit around the world at the moment, in Copenhagen, and I think it's in Kyoto at the moment. But we can see here like this relationship with the outside is always like bringing the courtyard into the building and into the realm of the within. And yeah, finally, like this different scales of projects moving from architecture to the work of the hand, like trying to move to smaller scales, like this restaurant that I've done a few 2 years ago in Palais Tokyo. And here actually I started designing a chair, which was really a challenge because really making it the most comfortable to the body. And always working with artisans, with like material, and trying to bring that into the experience of architecture, whether on the architectural scale or on the like interior design scale. Like we see this shop for chocolate maker. Actually, sitting from here, I feel the penguins are huge. I know it's a kind of visual effect, but they are huge actually. They are like Patrick Roger, who likes to make out of chocolate waste these huge sculptures, even a gorilla. And some also like learning from other cultures, like working in Japan. And here we worked with the master artist in France, like an exchange between them and the like master crafts also of from France and Japan. And it was in Arita, and here we did the exhibition design and really trying to show the capacity of space to be sometimes just ephemeral, which is just about light and the relationship with the object. This is the work of Nelly Saunier, who's a feather maker, and here it's about like these sayuki, which are bowls that are just left out of production in Arita, in the south of Japan, and reviving these and talking about ceramics, about this technique of the Johan Tenmuku. So this kind of work also that is more on the exhibition or ephemeral side is also kind of a learning process about different level of materiality and relation to the object. And I hope to see you in Serpentine. I'm not allowed to talk about all the process of the project yet, but we can sit all around in London, hopefully soon. Thank you.